The night air in San Antonio carried the sweet scent of jasmine and the lively sound of fiddle music drifting from the town square. It was Saturday evening in the summer of 1882, and the whole town had gathered for the monthly dance. Lanterns hung between the oak trees, casting a warm golden glow over couples spinning across the wooden platform that served as a dance floor. Elena Vasquez stood at the edge of the crowd, her dark hair pinned back simply, wearing her best dress of deep blue cotton. At 23, she had learned to blend into the background, to watch without being watched. Trust was a luxury she could not afford. She was thinking about leaving early when she felt someone approach from behind. "Ma'am, would you honor me with a dance?" The voice was smooth as aged whiskey, with just a hint of an Eastern accent. Elena turned to see James Morrison, the wealthy cattle rancher who had arrived in town 6 months ago. He stood tall in a perfectly pressed black suit, his dark hair combed back, and those green eyes that seemed to see right through a person. Every unmarried woman in 3 counties had set her cap for him, but he had shown interest in none of them. Until now. "I don't dance much, Mr. Morrison," Elena replied, keeping her voice steady. She had noticed him watching her during Sunday services at the general store, always from a respectful distance. Richmond meant trouble. Her mother had taught her that before she died. "Neither do I, truth be told," James said with a smile that transformed his entire face. "But tonight feels different somehow." He extended his hand, and despite every instinct screaming at her to walk away, Elena found herself taking it. His palm was surprisingly rough with calluses, not the soft hands of a man who only counted money and gave orders. They moved onto the dance floor as the fiddle began a slow waltz. James led her with surprising gentleness, never pulling too close, never making her feel trapped. "You're very quiet tonight," he said as they swayed to the music. "More so than usual. You've been watching me enough to know my usual mood?" Elena asked, raising an eyebrow. James had the grace to look embarrassed. "I suppose I have. You intrigue me, Miss Vasquez. You're the only woman in town who doesn't seem impressed by my cattle or my bank account. Money doesn't make a man trustworthy," Elena said before she could stop herself. Something flickered across James's face, too quick to read. "No," he agreed quietly. "It doesn't." "What does?" Elena studied his face in the lantern light. There was something in his eyes, a weight that spoke of secrets and hard experiences. "Time," she said finally. "Time and truth. Both are rare." The music ended, but James didn't release her hand immediately. "Walk with me?" he asked, away from all these watching eyes. Every reasonable thought told Elena to say no. Instead, she nodded. They walked beyond the reach of the lanterns, past the church and toward the small garden behind the schoolhouse. The music grew distant, replaced by the sound of crickets and the soft whisper of wind through mesquite trees. "There's something about you," James said, stopping beneath a large cottonwood. "Something that makes me want to tell you things I've never told anyone." "Don't," Elena said quickly. "Secrets are dangerous. So is loneliness," James replied, stepping closer. "So is pretending to be someone you're not." Elena's breath caught. There was something in his voice, a vulnerability that matched her own. "Who are you pretending to be, Mr. Morrison?" "Call me James," he said, raising his hand to touch her cheek. "And maybe someday I'll be brave enough to tell you." Before Elena could respond, James leaned down and kissed her. It wasn't the grabbing, demanding kiss she had expected from a rich man used to taking what he wanted. It was soft, questioning, as if he was asking permission even as his lips touched hers. For a moment, Elena forgot about trust and betrayal and all the reasons she had built walls around her heart. She kissed him back, tasting hope and danger in equal measure. The gunshot shattered the night like breaking glass. Elena felt the bullet graze her left shoulder, spinning her sideways into James's arms. The burning pain was nothing compared to her shock at James's immediate reaction. In one fluid motion, he pushed her to the ground, shielded her body with his own, and drew a pistol from inside his jacket. His movements were those of a trained soldier, not a cattle rancher. "Stay down," he commanded, his voice transformed from gentle suitor to deadly protector. Another shot rang out from the direction of the church bell tower. James returned fire twice, quick and precise. Elena heard a cry of pain and the sound of something heavy falling. "Are you hit?" James asked, turning back to her, his hands already examining her shoulder with the skill of someone who had treated bullet wounds before. "Just grazed," Elena managed, though her heart was pounding so hard she could barely hear her own voice. "James, who? I don't know," he said, but his eyes were scanning the darkness like a hunter, not like a confused rancher. "Can you stand?" Elena nodded, and James helped her to her feet. Her shoulder burned where the bullet had torn her dress and scraped her skin, but the wound was shallow. What disturbed her more was the expert way James was handling the situation, the way he kept himself between her and any potential threat, the way he seemed to know exactly what to do. "We need to get you to the doctor," James said, holstering his gun with practiced ease. "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" Elena asked as they hurried back toward the town square. James paused for just a moment. "Every man on the frontier learns to protect himself, ma'am." It was a reasonable answer, but something in his tone suggested it wasn't the whole truth. As they approached the lights and safety of the crowd, Elena's mind was racing. The kiss had been real, she was certain of that. But everything else about James Morrison suddenly felt like a carefully constructed lie. Back at the dance, people rushed to help when they saw Elena's torn, bloody dress. Dr. Matthews cleaned and bandaged her wound while James spoke quietly with Deputy Morris about what had happened. Elena watched him through the crowd, noting how he answered questions while revealing nothing, how he seemed to be studying everyone's reactions. As the evening wound down and people began heading home, James approached Elena once more. "I'll escort you home," he said. "That's not necessary," Elena replied, but James was already offering his arm. They walked in silence through the quiet streets until they reached the small house behind the dress shop where Elena lived and worked. At her front door, James paused. "Miss Vasquez, I want you to know that what happened tonight, the kiss, that was real. Whatever else you might think about me, that was completely real." Elena looked up at him, seeing something desperate in his green eyes. "And everything else?" James didn't answer immediately. Finally, he said, "Everyone has secrets. The question is whether they're the kind that help or the kind that hurt." After he left, Elena sat on her small bed, carefully removing her torn dress. As she folded it, something crinkled in the pocket. She reached inside and pulled out a small brass badge that must have fallen from James's jacket during their struggle. Her blood turned to ice as she read the engraving. Pinkerton Detective Agency. The same agency that had killed her father. Elena stared at the brass badge until her eyes burned. Pinkerton Detective Agency. The words seemed to glow in the lamplight, bringing back memories she had spent 5 years trying to forget. Her hand shook as she set the badge on her small wooden table and backed away from it like it might bite her. She was 16 again, crouched behind a water barrel in the dusty town of Esperanza, watching 3 men in dark suits drag her father from their tiny adobe house. Miguel Vasquez had been the town's blacksmith, a quiet man who fixed horseshoes and farm tools, who taught Elena to read using his old Bible, who never hurt anyone in his life. But the Pinkertons said he was passing messages to Mexican revolutionaries, said he was a traitor to Texas, said he deserved to die. Elena remembered the sound of boots on hard ground, her father's voice calling out that he was innocent, the terrible silence after the gunshots. She remembered running, always running, changing her name from Maria Elena to just Elena, dyeing her black hair brown, learning to speak without her father's accent. For 5 years, she had been invisible, safe, until tonight. Sleep was impossible. Every time Elena closed her eyes, she saw James's face as he kissed her, tender and honest, followed immediately by the cold efficiency with which he had returned gunfire. Which man was real? The gentle suitor or the trained killer? By dawn, she had decided it didn't matter. She would pack her few belongings and disappear before he could come looking for his badge. But as she folded her spare dress in her old carpet bag, something stopped her. If James was here hunting someone, if he was working a case, then maybe her father's real killer was still free. The Pinkertons who had executed Miguel Vasquez might still be in Texas, still destroying innocent lives. Elena set down the bag and picked up the badge again. This time, instead of fear, she felt something else entirely. Anger. A knock at her door made her jump. Elena? Are you all right, dear? It was Maria Santos, her closest friend and the only person in San Antonio who knew even part of Elena's story. Elena quickly hid the badge under her pillow and opened the door. Maria stepped inside, her round face creased with worry. I heard about what happened at the dance. Dr. Matthews said you were shot. Who would do such a thing? I don't know. Elena lied, studying her friend's face. Maria had been kind to her from the first day Elena arrived in San Antonio, offering her work as a seamstress, helping her rent this little house. But now Elena found herself wondering if there was anyone she could truly trust. That Morrison fellow brought you home. I heard, Maria continued, bustling around Elena's small kitchen and putting water on a boil. Folks are talking about how he protected you, how he knew just what to do. What kind of talking? Elena asked carefully. Oh, you know how people gossip. Some say he must have military training. Others wonder what a rich cattle rancher is doing carrying a gun to a town dance. Maria's eyes were bright with curiosity. What do you think? Elena poured herself coffee with steady hands. I think everyone has secrets, including you, dear one, Maria said gently. You've been jumpy as a cat since you arrived here. Sometimes I wonder what you're running from. Before Elena could answer, another knock interrupted them. Elena's heart hammered as she opened the door to find James standing on her step, hat in hand, looking every inch the concerned gentleman caller. In daylight, he seemed even more handsome, but Elena now noticed things she had missed before. The way his eyes constantly scanned their surroundings. The careful way he positioned himself so he could see both directions down the street. The fact that despite his perfectly pressed clothes, his boots were dusty as if he had been riding hard. Miss Vasquez, he said formally, I came to check on your injury and to apologize for putting you in danger last night. You didn't put me in danger, Elena replied. Someone with a rifle did. May I come in? James asked, his green eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her stomach flutter despite everything. Elena glanced at Maria, who was practically vibrating with curiosity. Of course, Maria was just leaving. Maria looked disappointed, but gathered her shawl. I'll check on you later, Elena. Mr. Morrison, you take good care of our girl. After Maria left, an uncomfortable silence filled the small room. James removed his hat and set it on the table, just inches from where Elena had hidden his badge. How was your shoulder this morning? Sore, but fine, Elena said, staying near the door. Dr. Matthews says it will heal cleanly. I'm glad. James stepped closer, and Elena caught the scent of leather and soap and something indefinably masculine. Elena, about last night. Before the shooting, I mean. I hope you don't think I took advantage of the situation. Did you? Elena asked directly. James looked startled by her bluntness. No, at least I hope not. That kiss, it meant something to me. More than it should have, considering. Considering what? James ran a hand through his dark hair. Considering I'm not the simple rancher everyone thinks I am. Elena's pulse quickened. Was he about to confess? Or are you then? Someone who's made more enemies than friends, James said carefully. Someone whose past might put anyone close to him in danger. It wasn't a full confession, but it was more than Elena had expected. She decided to test him. Are you a lawman of some kind? Something flickered across James's face. What makes you ask that? The way you handled yourself last night. Most cattle ranchers don't draw and fire that quickly. Most cattle ranchers in Texas have fought Indians or bandits. James replied smoothly. The frontier teaches hard lessons. Elena nodded as if she believed him, but every instinct told her he was lying. Do you have any idea who might have shot at us? I've been asking around town this morning, James said. Deputy Morris thinks it might have been someone trying to rob us, saw my watch chain, and figured I was worth robbing. And what do you think? James was quiet for a long moment. I think someone wanted one of us dead, and I don't believe it was random. The honesty in his voice surprised Elena. Which one of us? I don't know, but until I figure it out, I'd like to keep you safe. Would you allow me to escort you places? Walk you to work? Check on you in the evenings? Elena wanted to say no, wanted to tell him she could protect herself. But she also wanted to keep him close to learn more about what he was really doing in San Antonio. All right, she said, but I have conditions. Name them. No more lies. If I ask you a direct question, you give me a direct answer. James hesitated. There are some things I can tell you. Not yet, but I promise I won't lie to you unnecessarily. It wasn't perfect, but it was more than most men would offer. Elena nodded her agreement, and James visibly relaxed. Good. I'd like to take you to see my ranch this afternoon, if you're feeling up to it. I think you'd enjoy the ride, and it would get you out of town where you might be safer. Elena agreed, and after James left, she retrieved his badge from under her pillow. She studied it again, noting the scratches and where marks that suggested it had seen considerable use. Whatever game James was playing, it was serious and dangerous. But instead of running, Elena found herself planning. If James was hunting the men who had killed her father, maybe it was time to stop hiding and start fighting back. That afternoon, as she prepared for their ride, Elena made a decision that would change everything. She pinned James's badge inside her dress, right over her heart, and decided to become a hunter herself. The ride to James's ranch should have been peaceful. The afternoon sun painted the Texas Hill country in shades of gold and amber, and James rode beside Elena on a gentle mare he had chosen especially for her. He pointed out landmarks along the way, told her stories about the land, and seemed genuinely relaxed for the first time since she had met him. But Elena couldn't shake the feeling that she was riding into a trap. The Morrison Ranch sprawled across several thousand acres of prime cattle country, with a big house that spoke of serious money and corrals full of prime beef. But what caught Elena's attention was a small line shack tucked into a grove of oak trees near the eastern boundary. Something about it looked familiar, though she couldn't place why. That's where I've been staying, James said, following her gaze. The big house feels too empty for one man. As they approached the little cabin, Elena's chest tightened. The layout, the way it sat against the hillside, the old stone chimney. She had seen this place before in nightmares. James, she said carefully, how long has this cabin been here? Oh, 20 years or more, I'd guess. The previous owner used it for his foreman. James dismounted and helped Elena down from her horse. Why do you ask? Elena didn't answer immediately. She walked slowly toward the cabin, her heart pounding harder with each step. When she reached the door, she knew for certain. Carved faintly into the wooden frame were initials, M.V. Miguel Vasquez. Her father had been here. Elena. James's voice seemed to come from far away. Are you all right? You look pale. She spun to face him, her hand instinctively moving to where his badge was pinned inside her dress. My father was here, in this cabin. James went very still. What do you mean? 5 years ago, the night before he died. Elena's voice was barely a whisper. This is where they held him before the execution. The color drained from James's face. Elena, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Your father's name was Miguel Vasquez, wasn't it? He was killed in Esperanza in 1877. Elena nodded, afraid to speak. James closed his eyes for a moment, as if gathering courage. He wasn't a traitor. He was a federal marshal working undercover to expose a conspiracy involving stolen army weapons and corrupt officials. The words hit Elena like a physical blow. What? Your father was one of the good guys, Elena. He was trying to stop the same criminals I'm here to catch. James stepped toward her, his hands raised peacefully. The Pinkertons who killed him weren't real Pinkertons. They were criminals wearing stolen badges. Elena felt the world tilting beneath her feet. You're lying. I swear to you I'm not. James reached slowly into his jacket and withdrew a worn envelope. These are copies of your father's reports to the Federal Marshal Service. I've been carrying them, hoping someday I could find you and tell you the truth. With shaking hands, Elena took the envelope and opened it. The papers inside were in her father's careful handwriting. Reports detailing a conspiracy led by a man named Colonel Wade Hutchins to steal Army weapons and sell them to Mexican revolutionaries. At the bottom of the last page, her father had written, "If something happens to me, tell my daughter Maria Elena that I died trying to protect innocent people. I pray she will forgive me for the danger I brought to our door." Tears blurred Elena's vision. All these years, I thought he was a criminal. I thought I was the daughter of a traitor. You're the daughter of a hero, James said gently. And I'm the Pinkerton detective who's been hunting his killers for 3 years. Elena looked up at him sharply. You knew who I was when you asked me to dance. James had the grace to look ashamed. Yes, I've been watching you, trying to figure out how to approach you. I needed to know if you had any information about your father's investigation. So the kiss was just part of your job? Elena's voice was bitter with disappointment. No. James's reply was fierce and immediate. Elena, look at me. The kiss had nothing to do with my job. Neither does this. He stepped closer, cupping her face gently in his hands. I've been falling in love with you since the first day I saw you in church, looking so brave and alone. My feelings for you are the most real thing in my life. Elena wanted to believe him, but trust came hard after so many years of deception. How do I know you're telling the truth now? Because I'm about to risk everything to prove it to you. James pulled her against him, his arms warm and strong around her shoulders. Elena, I'm going to tell you something that could get us both killed. Colonel Hutchins is still alive, and he's still operating his criminal network right here in San Antonio. Deputy Morris is on his payroll, and so are half a dozen other officials. I've been gathering evidence for months, but I need one more piece to make the case stick. What piece? Your father hid a list of all the corrupt officials and their crimes. We think it's somewhere in San Antonio, but we don't know where. Elena's mind raced. Her father had been methodical about everything, always leaving clues for her to follow. Well, if I could help you find it. James pulled back to look at her. Elena, these people have already tried to kill you once. I won't put you in more danger. They killed my father and let me live 5 years thinking he was a criminal, Elena said, her voice growing stronger. I want to help you destroy them. Something shifted in James's expression, respect mixing with concern. It would be dangerous. If they suspect you're helping me, let me worry about that. Elena reached into her dress and pulled out his badge, pressing it into his palm. I found this last night after you brought me home. James stared at the badge, then at her. You knew what I was, and you still came here with me. I had to know the truth about my father. Now I do. Elena stood on her toes and kissed him, pouring all her gratitude and growing love into the gesture. This time, there were no lies between them, no hidden agendas. Just two people who had found each other in the middle of a dangerous game. When they broke apart, James rested his forehead against hers. We make a good team. Yes, we do. Elena smiled, feeling truly happy for the first time in years. So what's our next move? We start by figuring out who shot at us last night. I have a feeling it wasn't random, as if summoned by his words. The sound of horses approaching made them both freeze. James immediately moved to shield Elena, his hand going his gun. Through the trees, Elena could see 3 riders approaching the cabin. Her blood chilled as she recognized the lead rider. Maria, she whispered. But Maria wasn't alone. Flanking her were 2 hard-faced men Elena didn't recognize, both wearing guns low on their hips like professionals. and Maria herself was carrying a rifle across her saddle, pointed directly at Elena and James. "I'm sorry, Elena," Maria called out as the riders drew closer. "But you should have minded your own business." James's gun was already in his hand. "Elena, get behind the cabin. Now." But Elena stood frozen, staring at her best friend's face. "Maria, what are you doing?" "What I've been paid to do for 5 years," Maria replied sadly. "Watch Miguel Vasquez's daughter and report on everything she does. Colonel Hutchins has been very patient, waiting to see if you knew where your father hid his evidence. But now that you're working with a federal agent, the waiting is over." The betrayal hit Elena harder than any bullet could have. Her only friend, the woman who had been like a sister to her, had been a spy all along. "How could you?" "Because they promised to keep you safe as long as you stayed quiet," Maria said, tears streaming down her face. "But you couldn't leave it alone, could you? You had to go digging into the past." James fired first, his bullet catching one of the men in the shoulder and spinning him from his saddle. The other man returned fire, the bullet splintering wood inches from Elena's head. She dove behind the cabin as James had ordered, her mind reeling from Maria's betrayal. The gunfight was brief but vicious. When the smoke cleared, one of Maria's companions was dead and the other was badly wounded. Maria herself sat on her horse, no longer holding her rifle, sobbing uncontrollably. James kept his gun trained on her as he approached. "Who else is working with Hutchins?" "Everyone," Maria whispered. "The deputy, the bank president, the judge. They own this whole town." Elena stepped out from behind the cabin, her heart breaking as she looked at the woman she had thought was her friend. "Did you ever care about me at all?" Maria looked up at her with desperate eyes. "I loved you like a sister. That's why I try to protect you. But Elena, it's too late now. Hutchins knows you're helping the federal agent. He's coming for both of you, and he won't stop until you're dead." Elena's hands shook as she tied the bandage around the wounded man's arm. James kept his gun trained on Maria while questioning her about Hutchins' operation, but Elena could barely focus on their conversation. The woman she had trusted with her secrets, her fears, her dreams of a better life, had been reporting everything to her father's killers. "How many men does Hutchins have?" James demanded. "A dozen, maybe more," Maria sobbed. "Elena, please believe me. I never wanted this to happen. When they first approached me, they said they just wanted to keep an eye on you, make sure you weren't a threat." "A threat to what?" Elena asked, her voice hollow. "To their business. Your father's evidence could hang half the powerful men in Texas. They needed to know if you had it or knew where it was hidden." James lowered his gun slightly. "Where is Hutchins now?" "Close. Too close." Maria looked around nervously. "He was supposed to wait for my signal, but when he hears the gunshots," as if summoned by her words, the thunder of approaching hooves filled the air. Elena counted at least 6 horses, maybe more. James cursed under his breath and grabbed Elena's hand. "We need to go. Now." But as they rounded the corner of the cabin, Elena's heart sank. A line of riders blocked every escape route, their weapons drawn and ready. At their head sat a man in his 50s with steel gray hair and cold blue eyes. Even without an introduction, Elena knew she was looking at Colonel Wade Hutchins, the man who had ordered her father's death. "Miss Vasquez," Hutchins called out, his voice carrying the authority of a man used to being obeyed. "Or should I say, Miss Maria Elena Vasquez?" "Yes, I know your full name. I've known where you were for 5 years." James stepped protectively in front of Elena, but Hutchins laughed. "Put the gun down, Detective Harrison. Yes, I know who you are too. Did you really think you could infiltrate my operation without me finding out? I've been watching you since the day you arrived in San Antonio." Elena felt the world spinning around her. "You knew he was a Pinkerton from the beginning?" "Of course. We let him gather his evidence. Let him think he was clever. It's easier to control what your enemies know when you feed them the information yourself." Hutchins dismounted and walked toward them with casual confidence. Half of what he thinks he's discovered is lies. James's face was grim. "The weapons sales are real. The corruption is real. Oh yes, that's all quite real. But the scope of it, the names involved, the locations of our operations. You've been chasing shadows, detective. Hutchins stopped just out of reach of James's gun. The only real threat to us was always Miguel Vasquez's evidence. The list of names, dates, and crimes he compiled before we stopped him. Elena's mind raced. That's why you kept me alive. You needed me to lead you to it. Clever girl. Just like your father. Hutchins' smile was cold as winter. Unfortunately, you've proven to be just as stubborn as he was. We had hoped you would find his evidence and lead us to it quietly. Instead, you had to fall in love with a federal agent. I don't know where my father hid anything, Elena said desperately. Perhaps not consciously, but children often know more than they realize. Maria has been very helpful in reporting your habits, your routines, the places you visit regularly. Hutchins gestured toward Maria, who was still weeping silently. Tell me, Miss Vasquez, where did your father like to take you when you were a child? What was your special place? Elena's blood turned to ice. She remembered her father's words. If anything happens to me, remember our special place. She had thought it was just comfort, just a father's way of saying goodbye. But what if it had been instructions? I see you remember, Hutchins said, reading her expression. Excellent. You're going to take us there tonight. And Detective Harrison is going to come with us to ensure your cooperation. James raised his gun. Like hell I am. Actually, you are. Hutchins snapped his fingers, and two of his men dismounted. Between them, they dragged a figure Elena hadn't noticed before. Deputy Morris, beaten and bloody, but alive. Morris has been feeding us information, yes, but he also knows where all the bodies are buried, so to speak. If you don't cooperate, detective, I'll kill him slowly while Miss Vasquez watches. Then I'll kill her while you watch. Then, eventually I'll kill you. Elena saw James's shoulders sag in defeat. There were too many guns, too many men. Even if they fought, innocent people would die. What do you want us to do? Elena asked quietly. Simple. We're all going to take a ride to your father's special place. You're going to show us where he hid his evidence. And then, sadly, you and the detective are going to have a tragic accident. Hutchins remounted his horse and gestured for his men to secure their prisoners. As rough hands bound Elena's wrists, she caught James's eye. He gave her the slightest nod, and she understood. They weren't giving up. They were just waiting for the right moment to fight back. But as they were forced onto horses and surrounded by Hutchins' men, Elena wondered if that moment would ever come. The cemetery sat on a hill overlooking San Antonio, its weathered headstones casting long shadows in the moonlight. Elena's heart pounded as they approached her father's grave, the memory of his funeral flooding back. She had been 17, alone and terrified, with no one to comfort her except Maria. The irony wasn't lost on her now. This is it, Elena said quietly as Hutchins' men forced her from her horse. Her father's simple wooden cross stood among the older graves, marked only with his name and dates. No mention of his service, his sacrifice, his heroism. Hutchins dismounted and walked over to examine the grave. Miguel Vasquez. Such a plain marker for a man who caused me so much trouble. He turned to Elena with that cold smile. Now then, where exactly did your dear father hide his evidence? Elena stared at the grave, her mind racing. Her father's words echoed in her memory. Remember our special place. But their special place hadn't been the cemetery. It had been the old oak tree by the creek where he taught her to fish, where they shared stories, where he told her she was brave enough to face anything. I don't know, Elena said honestly. This isn't where we spend time together. Hutchins' expression darkened. Don't play games with me, girl. Maria reported that you visited this grave every month for 2 years after the funeral. Because I was grieving, Elena snapped. Not because I was looking for hidden treasure. One of Hutchins' men struck her across the face, sending her stumbling. James lunged forward despite his bound hands, but 2 rifles swung toward him. Easy, Detective, Hutchins warned. Save your heroics for when they might actually matter. Elena touched her bleeding lip and straightened. If you want me to find something that doesn't exist, beating me won't help. Perhaps not, but it might motivate the detective. Hutchins nodded to his men, who grabbed James and forced him to his knees beside Deputy Morris. Elena's breath caught as she saw Morris clearly for the first time. The deputy was barely conscious, blood seeping from multiple wounds. Whatever information he had given Hutchins, he had paid dearly for it. Morris tried to play both sides. Hutchins explained casually, feeding information to both of us. It didn't end well for him. James met Elena's eyes across the small cemetery. In the moonlight, she could see him subtly testing his bonds, looking for any weakness. He gave her the slightest shake of his head. Not yet. Let me think, Elena said, buying them time. She walked slowly around her father's grave, trying to remember everything about those final days. Her father had been different in the weeks before his death, more careful, more secretive. He had started locking his journal, something he had never done before. Then it hit her. The journal, her father's most precious possession, the one thing he never let out of his sight. She had assumed the Pinkertons had taken it when they arrested him. But what if? Elena knelt beside the grave and began digging with her bare hands in the soft earth near the headstone. He wouldn't have hidden it far from himself, she murmured. He'd want to keep it close. Hutchins watched her with growing interest. That's it, girl. I can see you remembering. Elena's fingers struck something hard beneath the surface. A small metal box, wrapped in oiled cloth. Her heart racing. She pulled it from the earth and held it up. Open it, Hutchins commanded. Elena unwrapped the cloth with shaking hands and lifted the lid of the box. Inside was her father's journal, its leather cover worn smooth by years of handling. But there was something else, a folded map of Texas with locations marked in red ink. Hutchins snatched the journal from her hands and began reading by lantern light. His face went pale, then flushed with rage. This is impossible. These names, these locations, some of this information came from after your father's death. Elena looked at the journal more closely and gasped. The final entries were in different handwriting. Someone had continued her father's work after his death. Morris, James said quietly. Morris has been feeding information to both sides because he was trying to finish what Miguel started. Deputy Morris raised his bloodied head. Miguel was my partner, he whispered. Undercover federal marshals. I've been documenting everything for 3 years. Hutchins' rage exploded. You fool. Do you have any idea what you've done? He pulled his pistol and aimed it at Morris' head. That's when James made his move. Rolling sideways, he swept the legs of the man guarding him and grabbed a fallen rifle. Elena threw herself at Hutchins, knocking his aim off just as he fired. The cemetery erupted in gunfire. Elena stayed low, crawling toward Morris while James fought off 3 men with deadly precision. Maria screamed from somewhere behind a headstone. Whether in fear or pain, Elena couldn't tell. A bullet grazed Elena's shoulder, the same one injured at the dance. But this time, instead of shock, she felt only determination. She reached Morris and began untying his bonds. The evidence, Morris gasped. Get it to Austin, Marshall Williams. James appeared beside them, bleeding from a cut on his forehead, but very much alive. How many left? Elena looked around the cemetery. 3 of Hutchins' men lay still among the graves. Hutchins himself was nowhere to be seen. He ran, James said grimly. But this isn't over. Yes, it is. Elena picked up her father's journal and the map. We have everything we need. Names, dates, locations, bank records. Morris documented it all. James helped her to her feet, and Elena realized the gunfire had stopped. In the distance, she could see riders approaching, but these wore federal badges that gleamed in the moonlight. Marshall Williams, Morris whispered with relief. I sent word before they took me. As the federal marshals surrounded the cemetery, Elena looked down at her father's grave. The simple wooden cross seemed different now. Not a marker of shame, but a monument to courage. "We did it, Papa," she whispered. "Your work is finally finished." 3 weeks later, Elena sat on the porch of James's ranch house, watching the sunrise paint the Texas hills in shades of gold and pink. Her shoulder had healed cleanly, leaving only a small scar to match the one she already carried. But the deeper wounds, the ones that had kept her heart locked away for so long, those were finally healing too. James emerged from the house, carrying 2 cups of coffee, moving carefully as his own injuries were still tender. The federal marshals had caught Colonel Hutchins trying to flee to Mexico, and his entire network had collapsed like a house of cards once Morris's evidence was presented to honest judges. 17 corrupt officials were now in prison, including 3 county sheriffs and a district attorney. "Any word from Marshal Williams?" Elena asked, accepting her coffee gratefully. "He'll be here this afternoon with the official papers clearing your father's name," James said, settling beside her on the wooden bench he'd built just for these morning talks. "There's also going to be a ceremony in Austin. They want to posthumously award Miguel the Texas Star of Honor." Elena felt tears sting her eyes, but they were good tears now. He would have been so proud, not of the medal, but of the truth finally coming out. "He'd be proud of you too," James said softly. "The way you fought for justice, even when you were terrified. The way you refused to let fear win." Elena turned to study his face. 3 weeks of honest conversation had revealed so much about the man behind the badge. James Harrison, originally from Virginia, who had lost his own father to corruption during the war, who had joined the Pinkertons not for glory, but for justice, who had resigned from the agency the day after the cemetery shootout. "What will you do now?" Elena asked. "Marshal Williams offered you a position with the federal marshals." James was quiet for a moment, watching a hawk circle lazily overhead. "I've had enough of badges and undercover work. Turns out what I really want is something much simpler." "What's that?" James set down his coffee cup and took Elena's hand in his. "I want to wake up every morning knowing the woman I love trusts me completely. I want to build something real with someone who sees past all the pretenses to who I really am." Elena's heart fluttered. "And who are you really? James Harrison?" "I'm a man who's tired of living lies," he said, lifting her hands to his lips and kissing her fingertips. "A man who wants to raise cattle and horses on this beautiful land. A man who hopes a brave, brilliant woman might consider sharing that simple life with him." Elena felt the last of her walls crumble. "That woman wouldn't happen to be me, would it? If she'll have me," James said, reaching into his shirt pocket and pulling out a simple gold ring. "Elena Vasquez, will you marry me? Not because of danger or deception or anything except the fact that I love you more than my next breath." Elena looked at the ring, then at James's face, seeing nothing but honesty and hope in his green eyes. "You know, I never trusted love before you. And now," Elena smiled, the expression transforming her entire face. "Now I know that real love isn't about perfect people or easy circumstances. It's about 2 people who choose each other every day, who fight for each other when it matters." She held out her hand, and James slipped the ring onto her finger with trembling hands. "Is that a yes?" he asked. "That's a yes to everything," Elena said, leaning forward to kiss him. "To marriage, to trust, to building something real together." When they broke apart, Elena rested her head against James's shoulder and looked out over the land that would be their home. In the distance, she could see the small cemetery where her father rested, his name finally cleared, his sacrifice honored. "I love you, James Harrison," she whispered. "And for the first time in my life, I'm not afraid to say it. I love you too, Elena Vasquez, soon to be Harrison," he replied, kissing the top of her head. "And I promise you'll never have reason to be afraid again." As the sun rose fully over the Texas hills, Elena closed her eyes and felt something she had never experienced before: complete and total peace. She had found her home, her partner, and her faith in love, all in one extraordinary man who kissed her like she was his last breath and loved her like she was his first hope of happiness.